Hi,
If y'all,
everyone.
while we wait, if y'all want to let us know where you're coming from, and if you would like to share a win lately, we could do that while we wait to get started a couple extra minutes.
Feel free to share in the chat. Tennessee,
Nashville,
Austin, Houston, San Antonio, Arkansas.
Arkansas.
Yeah,
Oh my
Oregon.
goodness, coming fast and furious now. This is
Oh,
awesome.
that's fantastic.
Where my Austin crew?
Yeah, North Texas, Nashville, New York City, Houston, Dallas. This is wonderful. If anyone would like to share in a chat, like in the chat, a win or something you're celebrating. Got somebody from
Thanks,
Memphis.
Christine. You got one? And some familiar names from Austin. Nice to see y'all.
Oh, excellent. Congrats,
Woo,
Mike.
congratulations, Mike.
You're in Austin. Husband's birthday. Love it. Shift in perspective. Oh my goodness. Wow, Karen. Birthday. This is great. Okay.
Happy birthday to Mr. Lisa. Celebrating a shift in perspective. Okay. And I'm a big fan of survival, so well done.
Yeah, I'm loving Leslie celebrating reaching out to new people and booking appointments. Those are wins worth celebrating.
Wow. I started out putting little emojis on everybody's, but y'all are coming in too quick. So just pretend you all got a cute little party guy emoji. Be way finally pro.
Great. Yeah. This is
Happy birthday, Rhonda. Almost. Congratulations, Letitia. You're set up on LinkedIn. Awesome. Nice keynotes.
All right.
Wow. Congratulations, everybody. Thrilled for you all. It's really fun to see how quickly those wins came when we asked for them. So love that you were ready to celebrate.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you all for sharing your wins. This is incredibly inspiring and so wonderful to see our community growing and each of us sharing both personal, professional, just whole life celebrations. This is great. Thank you so much. All right, we are going to get started today and appreciate you all being here. Thank you for joining. I'm Natalie Murray. I'm the chapter president for ICF Austin. And our ICF Austin chapter is thrilled to host this Southeast regional webinar on dancing with neurodiversity, our clients' brains differences. Brains are wildly different from each other, and today our speakers will address the question, how can we dance in the moment with these differences? Our speakers bring a great depth of experience in coaching and challenge us to use a neurodiversity-inclusive lens in coaching. All right, and then to share just a little bit about our speakers, and I do receive the bios, you're going to hear more from them in just a moment. So today you'll hear from Kate Arms. And one thing I just love about Kate's bio is that she has this beautiful wide spectrum and depth of experience and interest from her law degree at Harvard. And then she's focused on embodied cognition with trauma-informed care. And just, I love that, that combo and how we can all learn from her in this wide variety of things. And then Tracy Winter is also joining us. Tracy is a past president of ICF Austin. She also earned her PhD from the very same program as I did. And I love that personal connection that we have. One thing I want to point out about Tracy's bio is just her coaching practice is just incredibly inclusive. It's inclusive of age, of type of professional, of adult development level, of venue, of difference. When I think of Tracy, I think of inclusivity. So I'm thrilled to hold space for all of us to learn and grow together as coaches, guided by Tracy and Kate. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and pass this over to them.
Oh, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. And we'll go ahead and get started. Yeah, the session's been already introduced. Tracy and I are going to add just a little bit of nuance to the introductions about ourselves in terms of how this material about neurodiversity is personally relevant to us. So starting with me, and I am zooming in from Toronto. We now have this international gathering here. So I'm always pleased to come and zoom in from here. So the thing that I want to introduce about myself is my own version of neurodiversity. So Tracy and I both speak to this from a specific vantage point of lived experience, but our lived experiences are not the same as everybody else's. So I am profoundly gifted. I have aphantasia and I'm dyslexic, and I have an ADHD diagnosis and some of the traits of autism. So I've got a big old spectrum of stuff in my wiring. I speak partially from that lived experience and partly from study.
And I'm Tracy. Hi. It's nice to see so many people here and interested in this topic. So it's exciting. As I said earlier, I'm coming from Austin, as Natalie said, and I'm excited to be here. My connection personally to neurodiversity is that I'm twice exceptional, which Kate is as well. Twice exceptional means gifted and some other kind of neurodivergent. So for me, that's highly gifted. The plus is there because Kate keeps trying to convince me that I'm rating myself too low. So highly gifted and ADHD. I also have semi-diagnosis of autism. So that's where we're coming to you from in terms of our lived experience.
All right. So the first thing we want to sort of name here.
Kate, we can't hear you. Can't hear you. I can't anyway.
Oh, there we go. Am I back?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So the first thing I want to acknowledge is that this is going to be a really high-level overview of neurodiversity-inclusive coaching. There's a lot more that we can say on this topic, but we're going to do what we can to take the most value out of the time that we have together. We're going to start with a very short introduction to neurodiversity and then focus on how to be inclusive in your coaching. We're going to do our best to answer questions. Put questions in the chat. If you've got them, Tracy's going to be monitoring the chat so that she can interrupt our presentation to address things that it makes sense for us to take a pause and address in the moment, or otherwise we'll be able to go through the chat and pull those questions out when we do want to take a pause to take questions. This is going to be a lot of information download. We may have time for small group reflection in the breakout rooms. We're going to make a call on that when we get there about whether it makes sense to stay in the big group and do Q&A or whether it makes sense to do the smaller group reflections. And so we are going to do what we can with this content. We want to ask for grace for ourselves and for you to offer grace to each other and to yourselves around language. The language in this space is evolving fast in terms of the public conversation, and it has a tendency to be very, very personal, the way people use language around neurodiversity and neurodivergence and neurodivergent identities. And so people use language differently. And if we can listen for the intent and the concept more than the specific words, giving ourselves grace and the ability to sort of fumble our way through this material if we're new to it, that's going to really help us out. And finally, take care of yourselves as you need. Whatever you need to do to get the most out of what we're doing in terms of camera on or off, or stepping away for a moment and then coming back. I understand we're being recorded, so let that give you space to do what you need to get as much out of this as possible. Tracy, anything you want to add to that?
Just that last part. I know it's the lunch hour for a lot of people, so please eat if you need to, because you don't learn as much when you're hungry. So I'm always concerned about, have you eaten? I'm also Italian, so kind of coming from that.
All right. Oh, our yeah. Take it from there, Tracy.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do today. We're going to do that short introduction to neurodiversity. We're going to talk about the coaching relationship and neurodiversity. Then coaching skills, the key competencies. Then, so we did that section, and then we were like, well, I think there's more. So we added some more key competencies. Maybe those breakout rooms for reflection, and definitely enough room for Q&A. And I'm going to do something a little different right now, because we are giving you so much information. I'm going to post our slides right now. Some of them look like our slides that you're going to see, and some of them don't, because we use a lot of images. So what the slides are sort of like what our notes would be if we were taking notes on this presentation. So hopefully that can help you relax and just listen, or take notes if that's what you need to pay attention, but maybe that'll help. So give me 1 second and I'll have that posted. Right. I did not know it was going to be hidden like this. Sorry. And here. Okay.
All right. So
Okay.
Tracy, kick us off.
Yeah, so we're going to launch. We're talking about recognition, definition, and prevalence within the neurodiversity, as those are often the questions that come up.
The first part of the definition that we want to offer to you about neurodiversity is this physiological piece. There is intrinsic diversity in the physiology of human nervous systems, brain function, and cognition. And we think it's important to note that this is more than the brain. This is the nervous system as a whole, and that this is really physiological. But it shows up in how people think and how the brain and the nervous system process information. This is just a quick look at the elements of the nervous system in addition to the brain that are part of what we're talking about when we're talking about neurodiversity, because neurodiversity really refers to diversity at the level of all of these elements of the nervous system. Cognition and emotions are embodied, and so much of who we are as people is only partially conscious or completely not in our consciousness. Our conscious mind deals with such a small amount of the information and data that we're processing over and over and over again. And so an enormous part of coaching is actually involving behavior changes that are in relationship with these unconscious parts of ourselves and our nervous system. And the places that people are different aren't just in the structures of the brain, but are in the sensitivity and the functionality of all of these different components of the nervous system. So every human being is taking in information from the environment in a slightly different way based on the physiological differences in their nervous system. And then the structural differences in their brain change and customize how that data is processed.
Okay, so we're going to be tossing around some terms, and if you're interested in this stuff, you might also have been in the neurodiversity space. Oh, I skipped a slide. So we're going to do this first. Part of the definition of neurodiversity is that like different is different. So a different way of thinking, a different way of processing is not broken. which is sometimes how we see it when we define them with medical models, right? It's this brain works differently, and what does that brain need? So we, like some of the things that we use to classify behaviors as autistic or ADHD and diagnose those things are pretty pathological. They're deficit, right? Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is what ADHD stands for. And like the neurodiversity lens says, there's nothing missing just because they're different from the way most people are. That doesn't mean it's pathological. It just means we have a cool range of diversity, hence the word in the word, within the way that we operate, the way that we think.
Maureen.
So now we'll do a few definitions. So the neurodiversity paradigm, neurodiversity is a term that is attributed to Judy Singer, who coined it in the late 90s. And the idea is that there is no normal mind, which kind of goes along with what I was just saying, right? We actually are all special snowflakes. I know that's usually said as a derogatory thing, but we are unique. Brains are as unique as fingerprints. So there is not one mind that is just like another. The term neurodiverse means a group of people that have neurodiversity in them. Usually it means a group that has some neurodivergence and some not neurodivergence. But really, based on the definition of the paradigm, every group is neurodiverse, if you really think about it. Neurotypical then is sort of what we think of as normal. There are brains that are more like each other than others. And we think it's a majority, we're not really sure. But we think that the majority of people have brains that are more like each other, that are what we think of as normal, right? So we will occasionally use that term. We also don't really love to set it up as as different groups, as an us and them kind of thing. So we're careful with that terminology. And then neurodivergent means the brains that are significantly different from what we think of as neurotypical. So it's enough that it's noticeable both to the person and to other people. It might be innate or it might be acquired. So we're born with some things like giftedness, ADHD, autism. I mean, ADHD and autism are so hereditary. Dyslexia, dyspraxia, all of those things can be we can be born with, but also some of them can be acquired. So if you have a traumatic brain injury and it injures one of your parts of your brain that serves executive function or emotional management, you can start exhibiting symptoms of ADHD, for instance. So there are ways in which you can acquire the thing after the fact. And neurodivergent is the term we use to describe a single person. So neurodiverse is for a group, neurodivergent is for a person. That language is pretty well accepted now. So if you want to sound in the know, use those terms that way. So we also might.
The next couple of words are not so common, I think.
Yeah, so you might hear us refer to a neurotype. And a neurotype is kind of like one of the diagnoses, right? So one neurotype might be ADHD, another neurotype might be autistic, another neurotype might be dyslexic. So we talk about them in those sort of discrete categories. Those are different neurotypes. The reality is that neurodivergences seem to travel in packs. So it's very rare that I meet somebody that has only one neurotype. It's often some layering of that, like Kate and I were talking about when we introduced ourselves, right? We both have a combination of things. That's pretty common. And then this is a new, what's a PDA or Jim? So we don't have that. Oh, yeah, we do. PDA. So PDA stands for persistent demand avoidance, or pervasive demand avoidance. And in the autistic community, it's also been reclaimed as persistent desire for autonomy. So it is folks who, when you ask them to do something, the brain immediately goes, no way. which can be really challenging. We see that in kid behavior and try to get that, like behavior beat out of them. So let me know if that doesn't answer the question enough. So neurohumility, this actually is a relatively new term even to us, but we thought it was really applicable talking about coaching. So neurohumility is this general humbleness toward how other people are and how other people experience the world. It's that coaching mindset of coming curious, of not assuming that you know, of like wanting to get behind the other person's eyes requires neurohumility. So that one's one you might not see floating around yet, but we thought it was really applicable to coaching when we found it. There is not one singular assessment that would profile to learn what are all the neurodivergent types. And honestly, some of the assessments are more or less useful, even in single neurotypes.
Yeah. All right. So we want to touch on two really important different approaches to difference, because this shows up and impacts our coaching quite often if we are paying attention. So the first is the medical model of disability, which is the diagnostic approach that says there are some brains that don't work right and we need to fix them. And it's the sense that this is a problem that needs to be fixed. And in terms of coaching, this often shows up in how do I deal with the fact that I've got this broken brain as the way the client presents. And we'll get into that a little more in detail. But the social approach to difference and disability is the idea that given my brain functionality, or given the specific brain functionality that exists, or the physical difference that exists, because this works in that space too, it's that social systems are difficult to navigate, and I am disabled by the system's inability to accommodate my needs and to include me. Anything you want to add to that, Tracy?
Not really. It's a really stark difference in my mind to the way the framing of neurodiversity and neurodivergence.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to acknowledge that the medical model has been predominant sort of historically in this conversation, and the neurodiversity paradigm and other conversational things that are happening in the modern world around this is trying to shift to a more social and subjective approach to difference. And as coaches, really landing on that social approach is really powerful for us.
Absolutely. So here are some examples of the types of neurodivergences there are, also sometimes known as diagnoses. So we've got, some of these are probably familiar. ADHD is not a deficit of attention, it's a self-management issue, an executive function issue of how do I manage my emotions? How do I manage that focus? Because trust me, we can focus down a rabbit hole like nobody's business, and it's 3 hours later, and I forgot that I was going to eat lunch 3 hours before. Dyslexia is some difficulty with reading. Dyscalculia is difficulty with numbers and math. Tourette's syndrome is lack of control over, sometimes it's bodily tics, sometimes it is verbal tics, that kind of thing. Sensory processing can be its own thing, and also it's common among people with neurodivergence. So things like, I'm really sensitive to light. It's almost impossible for me to drive in Austin if I don't have my sunglasses on. I'm really sensitive to sound as well. Like if there's too many different sounds that I'm trying to process at once, my brain just goes on the fritz. So that's the auditory processing part. Autism, familiar with that to some extent. Dyspraxia is now called something like developmental coordination disorder. So it's a lack of awareness of the body in space. Sometimes even though as a dancer, sometimes I wonder if I have this because I'm consistently running into things. Trauma is one of the acquired kinds of of neurodivergence, because that changes the brain structure and then changes behavior. And gifted, I already saw a question about, didn't I say a question about that? I thought I did. So somebody asked how we define gifted. Oh, okay, Kate. That is a great question, and a whole other webinar. In general, giftedness is, if it's defined by IQ test, it's defined by being at least 2 standard deviations above the norm. So that's about a 128 IQ. But we actually define in psychological area, we define giftedness as asynchronous development. It creates intensity of experience, which gives a qualitatively different experience of being in the world. That's a lot of stuff, and we're happy to talk about that, later. I don't want to get too distracted here. So the other like things that come with this are everybody has most people in neurodiversity or neurodivergence have a more sensitive nervous system. So the threshold for what stimulus activates our nervous system is lower. It's easier to trigger into that. So threat assessment, for instance, we might assess threat more quickly than another. We also might do it so quickly that we don't recognize it's not a threat. We might be hypo or hypersensitive, so not noticing X, Y, or Z, or always noticing X, Y, or Z. Synesthesia is a really interesting thing. My brain is still trying to put its head around. It's when I have a profoundly gifted friend who's an ADHDer, and she sees letters as colors. Like they all just have colors, and she can't tell me why. That's just how they are in her brain. So it's this combination of like what it is to us, and often color or music or something else, the brain's connecting to that in some way. And a lot of us have a novelty bias. If it's not new, if it's not fun, if it's not interesting, this is especially true for ADHDers and gifted folks, it is going to be less likely that we are going to want to be engaged in it. Kate, got anything else in there?
No, I think that it's just sort of valuable to know that all of these things that are in the clouds, the threat assessment and the synesthesia and the novelty bias, that way of thinking about things, those sort of functional things are much more valuable for us as coaches than the labels on the categories, because it's much easier when you're working with a client. If you've identified, I just have a tendency to see things as a threat when maybe they're not, that's something that's really workable in a coaching relationship. And so to actually look at like, what are the functional processing characteristics in the conversation with your client is much more useful than the labels themselves, which are just these big packages of generalization. All right. So the question of prevalence is such an interesting question, because it's one that people are really curious about. Like, this sort of burst onto the public conversation scene of all of these conversations, the burst of late diagnosis of ADHD and autism, where we get this sort of bounce back of like, it seems like everybody's got ADHD now. So this question of like, how prevalent is this? What's going on here in terms of the population demographics? And the short answer is we don't actually know, which is a completely unsatisfying answer, but is actually true. And the reason that we don't actually know is complicated. We don't know because there's disagreement about what counts as neurodivergent. So people who sort of put these things together, put some things in and some things out. As Tracy said, these differences have a tendency to travel in packs, because there are a lot of the sort of medical model diagnostic labels that are actually a variety of different ways that a highly sensitive nervous system can respond to the world, depending on what the environmental conditions are and the specific nature of those sensitivities. So what counts is not universally agreed. Definitions in research are as varied as the definitions in the wider conversation. Until 2013, it wasn't possible to be diagnosed with ADHD and autism simultaneously, and that's been a change. So any research that was done before 2013 doesn't even have the modern categories involved. And so it gets hard to pull things apart there. Data collection, sample selection are really difficult. We have no idea, for instance, thinking about autism and ADHD, we have no idea how many people were put in one bucket when actually they could have been in two buckets or were excluded from studies in the past. We just don't know. Access to assessment and the prevalence of undiagnosed individuals, particularly in marginalized communities, is a real challenge for getting good data about prevalence. So there's lots of self-diagnosis, which of course gets easier and easier with the information being distributed on the internet, and easier to also mis-self-diagnose. And so it's hard to know sort of what's going on. So lots of self-identification. There are studies that include people who are self-identified, and there are studies who don't include people who are self-identified. So the data is really a bit of a mess, which is a shame, but also that's the reality of what we're dealing with. There is a statistic that is commonly cited of 15 to 20%, and that seems to find its way back to a CDC, so Center for Disease Control study. But the data about what was included in that study raises all of the questions that I just read. Tracy's just shaking her head at it. So there's this sense that there's something in the order of 15 to 30% of the population that is sort of different enough that it's a real challenge. But I've seen people who've defined this in such a way that mean that 60% of people fall into the neurodivergent category, which is more than half. So we don't actually know, which is kind of interesting and a little wild. And welcome to the adventure.
It's kind of what I was saying earlier when I was talking about neurotypical. Like, is 40% still typical? Right? So because we don't know the prevalence very well, those terms are a little iffy. The other thing I would say about the assessment and diagnosis is the way that these things are manifesting also is being recognized as widely different. ADHD and autism in girls and women often looks very different than what we usually think of, which, like, the stereotypical ADHDer is an 8-year-old boy running around a classroom disrupting everything, right? Or for autistic, often it's like somebody who is nonverbal and, you know, has tics. And that's not necessarily the case. So the other thing is in women, we're finding ADHD manifests differently in childhood. Then it changes via puberty, because ADHD symptoms are often really linked to hormones. So it manifests differently during the childbearing years. And then after menopause, it manifests even more differently. So all of that, like, there's just a lot of fuzziness.
Yeah, and symptomology is increased under stress. So part of some people's hypothesis about why we're seeing so much new identification now is actually because with the stress of the pandemic and global warming, that actually more people are exhibiting symptoms than previously because of higher levels of baseline stress in the community. So very interesting question, no answers. So we're going to talk about dealing with the fact that we're just going to deal with the person in front of us when we're coaching, rather than trying to fit them into these boxes.
Sarah, the current thought on genetic or hereditary component is we haven't isolated a gene that is ADHD that I know of, or that is autism, or that is dyslexia. And if a kid gets diagnosed with some kind of neurodivergence, we look to the parents and go, okay, so which one of you is it? Or both. Like the evidence of that is very clear that there's a hereditary piece. We don't have the genetic piece of that in place. Okay. So here's the thing with all of this. Coaching is actually perfect for neurodivergent folks. I mean, it's great for everybody, but it sort of accounts for all of these ways that we process information differently and therefore have different behaviors show up. One is it's individualized. So you might have heard the saying, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. As in, you really, like, we have some things that are in common among people with autism or people with ADHD, and also that may not be what you see in the individual. So the fact that we come to coaching looking at the individual, not at them as a representative of a sample, is terrific for this group. Coaching is client-led. So Jim's question about PDA, or some kids get diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder, which is not helpful. That all disappears because we're not telling them what to do. We're not giving advice. We're not, saying, well, you should do it this way, because that's not going to go well. It's client-led. So it lets them move into the novelty, lets us move into the what's interesting, and what's going to work for me, because I've tried everything else and what's out there doesn't work. It's also really practical. So one of the things about the medical model is it feels really static. Like you have these deficits and you're done. And what we do with coaching, right, is we help people change mindset to help them change behaviors so that they can get to where they want to go. That practicality is terrific, given the social challenges that face between neurodivergent folks living in sort of a world that isn't necessarily built for them. And the thing about coaching is it's heart opening, right? There is care, there is love, there is acceptance, there is validation. We see our clients as creative, resourceful, and whole. And for some people, it may be the first time someone's seen them as creative, resourceful. That whole thing about different, not broken, right? We don't see our clients as broken. We see them as creative, resourceful, and whole. But I was on a discovery call one time with a gal who was about 22. She just graduated from college, so 22, 23. And about within 20 minutes of starting the call, she was in tears because she was being seen. She said, nobody else has been interested in this. Nobody else understands this. And I was just doing the coachy thing of listening, reflecting, but reflecting her as she sees herself. So heart opening is not a small thing, what we do, right?
All right, so let's get specific about coaching.
Yeah, because that's what we're here for, right? We said it was a very short introduction. Everything's relative. So the coaching relationship and neurodiversity. Let's dive into what we often see. So here's some topics that I see my neurodivergent clients and Kate sees bringing to coaching. All the bubbles appeared. So they will come in and say, I want to work on time management or organization or prioritization or leadership skills, or they'll describe something like burnout, or general communication. Sometimes the communication kind of goes like this when you have a different way of taking in the world, processing it, and like putting it out there, right? So all of these things are the tangible things that people come with. Neurodivergent adults often have less hope, more frustration, more self-doubt than neurotypical clients, because they have gotten reflections throughout their life of they're doing it wrong, they're being it wrong. So they bring sometimes that they're with them, that sense of brokenness that they have embodied. So here are some things that you might hear aligned with those that we hear from our clients a lot. Definitely the self-exasperation, and especially with the laziness or procrastinating. I swear the number of times I've heard, I know what to do, I just don't do it, and I can't figure out why. It is legion. And the self-exasperation with that and the self-talk, the negative self-talk around that is just beating them down even more. But it is super frustrating when it feels like, why can't I just do the thing? It's not that I don't want to, right? And so there's a lot of shame in that. There's a lot of confusion, especially looking around and seeing, well, other people have the ability to do that. Like other people can keep their files in order. Other people get places on time. It looks easy and people say it's easy. So why isn't it easy for me? It's really exasperating. I wrote for a while on LinkedIn, and you can see them through my profile, a series of things that started with, if I'm so smart, why can't I? And I've heard that one a bunch of times too from my clients, especially my twice exceptional clients. If I'm so smart, why can't I pack easily? But it is such a travail for so many of us that are struggling with some of these things. Kate, anything to add?
I think the one thing that I just sort of want to put in here is that, so sometimes we do have clients who show up and sort of announce an identity that is in the neurodivergent space. And more often, these kinds of practical things and emotional states are hints to coaching if we're not putting ourselves out as neurodivergent specialists. And so there are sort of two ways that into the coaching relationship that people come. And sometimes people come in with, I've got a diagnosis and I want to help sort of figuring out with this context. And sometimes it's, these are things that I'm experiencing and I haven't got a label for it. But we don't need a label to coach them. Yeah.
Which sort of answers your question, Margie, but I'm going to hang on to it and see if we still need to address it by the time we're done, because it might get answered along the way.
Yeah.
So goals can really change along the way. And I'll be honest, I don't call them goals. That's a quirk of mine. I work with a lot of ADHDers in particular, and they have set goals over and over and failed to reach them over and over because they're not doing it in ways that work with their brain. So I say, what changes do you want? But that whatever that trajectory, wherever we're going in the coaching relationship, may start out with that organization, time management, behavioral change. But it often requires making progress on the self-talk and the negative emotions, which is not unlike other people. It just sometimes is more ingrained and sort of like in the stuck place for our neurodivergent clients. So this raises questions about, so what's a life worth living? Is it just changing my behavior to fit? Or are there other ways to be that will help me, relax a little more, have more energy, be myself, right? Be authentic. So we're usually prepared for that. This is what my clients seem to find. I have testimonials over and over that say, I came in for time management, organization, prioritization. I left with all those things, but I also left understanding my brain more and not fighting with my brain as much and being able to solve my problems in a way that works for me, even if it works for no one else. So watching for that, and possibly like recontracting. So it seems like we're working on this now. What do you think about that? By the 4th or 6th or something session, can be really helpful. But we gotta let that flow happen. And I think we do as coaches anyway, just a reminder.
Yeah. For me, it often looks like people coming in with, I want to figure out how to succeed at this job better or in this role better, and ends up with, I want to figure out how to navigate from being in this role that doesn't fit me to an entirely different way of being in the world and making my living. And that often comes through just through the conversations. They get some insight about actually a bigger picture sense of fulfillment that they decide that they're entitled to want, possibly not having ever felt that they were entitled to want to be happy.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to start just sort of diving into the competencies a little bit to get a little deeper and a little bit more specific and nuanced about what this means. The real thing that we're going to be talking about as we go into these competencies is we don't modify our coaching for neurotype. We modify our approach to each conversation for the individual in front of us. And the lens that we use to be neurodiversity inclusive is interpreting these competencies in a way that is open to the full breadth of humanity so that we can see our clients really as whole human beings, even where we're stretching ourselves in terms of empathy, and our brains and their brains don't process things differently. So we have to sit more in the space of not knowing and more in the space of trusting our clients to teach us about who they are. So the first thing from this embodied cognition lens that I want to touch on is coaching presence and trust and safety. In order for the coaching relationship to be safe enough for the client to be courageous, there's this interpersonal dynamic using two nervous systems that has to be engaged in service of that safety. Because of how common it is for neurodivergent people to have been harmed in interpersonal relationships over time, as coaches, it's really crucial that we use this as the foundational grounding in our coaching relationships to be neurodiversity inclusive. And one of the big challenges that we face is that the inherent nervous system wiring of lots of these neurodivergences mean that dysregulation and not feeling safe is easier to get into. So there are ways that as coaches, it's easier for us to trigger dysregulation in our clients if we're not being open and really taking care of giving them the leadership, asking for permission. But it's also about taking care of our regulation so that we are the coaching presence that they can co-regulate off of, and we don't get inducted into their dysregulation if they get dysregulated. So we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive into what those words regulation and dysregulation mean to give a little bit more context.
So there are some things that you can watch for to see if your client is becoming dysregulated in a session. There's some physical things. So as coaches, we often will notice the objective things that are happening. Like, I notice your face just got flushed. What's happening for you right now? Or I noticed that, your body is tenser right now. What's happening right now? Right? We do that all the time. So these are some of the things physically and objectively that we can watch for on the left to sort of note and pause and see what's going on for the client, that those things are happening. The ones on the right are more conceptual, obviously, signs of dysregulation, lack of hope, rigid attachment to identity, as in like, this is who I am and I'm not going to change. Definitely being stuck in distrust. That's why that trust and safety piece is so hard. Often not doing their work between sessions and rationalizing what they're doing. So oftentimes these things are after a couple of sessions like this, they're regarded as uncoachable. When in fact that might not be the case. It might just be that there needs to be more foundation of trust and safety so that people can consider relaxing a few of these things to be in conversation and to be in possibility. The frequently not doing work between sessions, I hear all the time in ADHD coaching, and like, okay, so maybe it's not interesting enough. Maybe it's not fun enough. Maybe it doesn't align with their values enough, right? Like, these are all places to get curious about what's going on rather than just see the symptom and make a decision that they're not coachable. So we've seen a number of clients who other coaches have seen as uncoachable, who with a different framework to work through, a different lens, and an understanding, they could come more into regulation enough to see the possibilities we need them to see to be coached.
Yeah, Tracy, if I can just sort of dig into this frequently not doing work between sessions just a little bit more. One of the things that we frequently see, or at least I frequently see, is that a client will come into session, and through the course of the session, they will shift to a place of openness and possibility, and they will feel courageous, and they will feel willing to take on something to try and experiment with. And that sense of openness won't last for very long after the session. And then all of the things get in the way of exploring whatever it was that they were trying to explore. And then they'll come back and they'll feel great in session, and we'll do the work to open up. And then they'll close down again and not be able to sort of move into trying things between sessions. And this is actually an incredibly workable moment, because this is a wonderful time to say what's different about being in the coaching session and being outside in terms of what feels possible. And it's a wonderful way of actually opening up the conversation about what is their experience of being regulated versus dysregulated. And so it's a really wonderful place to work and not a place where sort of going, well, I can't help. It's actually like there's so much power in that piece. Okay.
And here's the thing, like, I mean, Kate was sort of saying this, but when the client's dysregulated, you can't coach. You can get curious, you can ask questions, you can talk, work through their dysregulation toward regulation, but you're not going to make progress toward their goals because their brains aren't fully online, right? They're in fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flop, whatever. So sometimes we need to hold a little bit more of our partnership than others, because once Humpty Dumpty's fallen off the wall, that is not the time to talk about, so what values do you think might be helpful to you right now, right? We need a whole egg to do that. So it's partnering, but sometimes we need to hold the container with a little bit more energy so that the client can move into regulation where we are. So the underlying part of that is we need to maintain our self-regulation, our coaching presence, and be that regulation so that they have somewhere to come to. So that's a really key part of, like, are you able to do that? Can you stay regulated when someone else is dysregulated? And we work on that all the time in coaching, maintaining a coaching presence. And that's one of those places that there's just always room for growth in that. So yeah, this says the client is dysregulated, you can't coach. If the coach is dysregulated, it's also not going to work. Needs to be both.
Yeah, and this is kind of an overstatement, because when the client is dysregulated, you can coach if you can help them out of dysregulation, and you can actually coach on the shift from dysregulated to regulated, but you can't coach on the other goals until that regulation is in place.
And so what are the signs that that's coming back online? Well, here's the physical objective things, right? Maybe their eyes start to twinkle a little. I'm not sure that's actually a physiological thing, but we know what that looks like often, right? Especially with our clients we've been working with a while. Their breathing eases, right? Their face relaxes. Maybe their voice isn't as squeaky or pitchy or in the basement, either of those extremes. Able to smile and laugh about things. I don't know about y'all, but like laughing with my clients is a key part of our relationship. It's part of the trust and safety. It's something I look for in discovery calls, actually, is like, are we having a fun time together? Are we laughing? When the client's dysregulated, they're not going to have access to that. So when that comes back, that's a sign that they might be more regulated. The other things that are more conceptual is their own sense of curiosity, their own sense of playfulness with concepts, the ideas, right? That sense of possibility, things could be different. The sense that they have the ability to make change in their lives and in the world, that sense of agency, right? And just sort of the willingness, feel of willingness. they become what we would think of as coachable, except for everything we just said. So those are some of the things that can distinguish for you as you're watching out for regulation or dysregulation. And it's not an on-off switch. It's sort of a dimmer switch, right? Can help you figure out, am I regulated? Like, is this working are these things happening for me? And then how about my client? Okay.
Yeah, I think this is a really great way of looking at what coaching presence really is. The presence, the physical being actually transmits it's safe to be in this conversation. And so it's what this openness and curiosity around the client, we physiologically can bring that into the session and they can just relax in our presence. And this shows up when we use phrases like, I need to get curious. This is about us shifting into that regulated place for ourselves. If we talk about taking a stand on behalf of the client's growth, that faith that they can grow, that's a way of actually embodying the groundedness of the possibility. We can believe for them when they find it hard to believe for themselves, and that actually helps them regulate. The really cool thing about all of this is that every human being's nervous system actually wants to regulate and is actually looking for ways to regulate. And when that trust and safety is present, it feels like a relief. They're looking for, can I do this? Because this is what the system naturally wants. And so, yes, we need to be conscious of it. And also, there are partners in making this happen. They want to meet us there. If we can hold that space, they're going to find as much capacity as they have to land in it. And so if we can just stay trusting that they will come to themselves, it happens. It doesn't always happen fast. And if they can't do it, that's a really clear sign that we should be referring to therapy or a psychiatrist or something else. If we act, but sometimes it's just another more experienced coach. But if they can't get to that place of regulation in a coaching session, that's a sign that we're out of our depth. And so the more that we use our coaching skills, maintain our coaching presence, and trust the process, the more that safety just gets created naturally. One of the things that it's really, really easy to do with our neurodivergent clients is to get inducted into giving advice. They're staying in the coaching mindset can be really difficult with some of our clients, because if there's a history of being told you're doing it wrong, you've got the wrong goals, you're not interested in the right things, you're not paying attention to the things that matter, there's this sense of brokenness that our clients might come in with. And it's really tempting to a lot of people to sort of come in and go, so help me, the way that a soccer coach might teach the rules of the game to 4-year-old or 5-year-old players. Sort of that mode of coaching, it can be really easy for people to come in and go, just help me. But the reality is that they're as capable of Googling the possible things that might be solutions to their problems as we are. And the only person who has the ability to try out different things and figure out what works with their system and figure out what actually works for them, and grow into the skill set is them. And so we do our clients such a service if we stand on their agency and their ability to figure this out for themselves, and we partner with them with curiosity, and hold back from offering advice, even when they ask for it. We and keep handing them back their agency over and over and over again, that belief that we have in their ability to have that agency and accomplish their goals is such a gift for them, even if it's not what they think they want in the moment. Anything you want to say on that point, Tracy?
I like what Kate said about you can Google this and you'd be fine. You know, if that, I always say that to my clients in my discovery calls when they're kind of like, wait, you don't give tips and tricks, you don't give me strategies, because that seems to be what coaching has the reputation for, and is in a lot of coaches that are not necessarily ICF certified. And I literally say to them, look, you're here because I would bet you have Googled things, you have tried everything everybody else has said, and nothing has worked, right? Like, that's what brought you here. So we got to do something different. What I tell you to do is going to be from where I am, not from where you are, and you're the expert on you. I mean, it's all the basic coaching stuff, right? But there's something with the potential dysregulation, it does make it more tempting. We teach this stuff, and I just caught myself this morning, right? Okay, step back. Right. It's you can slide into it really easily. So that coaching presence and reflection is really key.
Yeah. And I love your acknowledgement that this stuff is really hard. Once dysregulation's in the space, finding the way back to this coaching mindset gets harder. It really does. So as Tracy said, those are the sort of key competencies. We're going to do a little bit of touch on these 3 other competencies. These are going to be lighter touches to just give a little bit more nuance to some of the things that we might do in session. So the first thing is about listening, and adding the neurodiversity lens to listening means a couple of things. One is that we're always listening for that dysregulation piece, that's just sort of always in there. We're paying real attention to those subtle signs of, oh, this hit a nerve, or this hit a trip, or they're closing down, or they're opening up. It's a great opportunity to reflect to our clients and hold up that mirror. Oh, look, this thing you closed down, this thing you opened up, helping their self-awareness there. The other thing is we listen from a perspective of presuming that we don't know how the client's brain processes data. And so we presume that our intuitions are wrong, and we presume that our sense of interpretation of what we're getting from them is wrong, so that when we are reflecting back what we see, it's coming from a place of, I can see some things that are going on, and I'm curious about how you're interpreting them, and possibly having a conversation about, this is what I'm guessing. Is that what you're experiencing? But starting from that place of everything that's going on in my mind that's not just absolutely observable is a guess on my part. And I'm going to be wrong at least as often as I am right.
I'm gonna pause for just a second, because I just wrote a response to Charjay, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, saying that dysregulation and regulation all seem like they're indistinguishable from patterns of stuckness that we see in our clients. What we're talking about right now, we're talking about it in terms of neurodiversity and in terms of neurodivergence. And also, this is actually neurodiversity inclusive coaching. You don't have to know their neurotype. You don't have to know if they have a diagnosis. This is, and really it's like taking the core competencies and digging deeper and embodying them even further. When you do that, you will be able to work with your neurodivergent clients even better, and your not neurodivergent clients also even better, because everybody's got that individual brain. These are just some patterns we see more often, or just keep coming across in our work. So hopefully that helps with framing. So that was an aside, coming back. So
yeah, if I could just like add, if I could just add sort of one piece in there. The stuckness has a tendency to be stucker for neurodivergent clients. And I think is a lovely way of thinking about that.
So,
Oh, crazy. Onto the flat mirror.
right. So, evoking awareness questions, like this is like my favorite competency, honestly. I think it's so fun. But some of what we do is evoking awareness of like what they actually know about themselves underneath. So when I say a flat mirror, I mean we're reflecting what is actually seen, and we're taking our assumptions out as much as possible. So what we reflect is then much closer to how they see themselves, because we're getting it from listening to them, as opposed to a funhouse mirror like we're seeing in here, right? Which they've gotten a lot of their lives, where people are reflecting from their own lens of what's normal, what's okay, what's not weird. And they're getting those reflections of weirdness for their natural ways of being. So, what's normal is what's natural. What's normal for that individual is what's natural for that individual. And we can help normalize those experiences. By when we reflect sort of normal assumptions, like, well, just get a planner and stick to it. Or just, stop doing that. But, which we don't do as coaches. And also sometimes, we're humans. That can like re-traumatize them because they've been getting that their whole lives, and that's going to bust into trust and safety. So take a stand for their not brokenness, right? Like I said, they may have embodied that medical model of there's deficit, I'm broken, I need to be fixed. And we see them as creative, resourceful, and whole. So if we reflect that to them, the world opens up. I see it over and over. And we want to, reflect mostly observable facts that we see happen, so that they can see that flat mirror really clearly and relate to it. So that's evoking awareness with a flat mirror.
Okay.
Yeah.
A quick touch on ethics, because ethics is, people ask Tracy, why we founded the Neurodiversity Coaching Academy. And this is the heart of it. The harm that can be done when we coach from a place of we know the answers, or we don't see our clients as whole in their differences, and naturally resourceful. We've seen inadvertent harm done. So the question is, how do we know whether we are in a position to coach this particular client? And so we want to offer you a few things. Tracy, do you want to upload the document? Yeah. We've got a couple of slides here where we're going to go through quite a lot of questions that we can use for self-assessment. And the document that Tracy is uploading into the chat actually has all of them down so that you can take away the handout, like download the document and you can have it as a reference. So when a client comes and we're looking at, or a particular client is with us, or a potential client comes and we are looking at our own competency to coach the specific client, there are some reflection questions that are powerful for us to keep an eye on. Can I maintain a coaching presence with this client? If I can't maintain a coaching presence with this client, probably somebody else will do a better job coaching them. Can I recognize the subtle signs of dysregulation in them? Clients who have learned to mask to get by can be very subtle to read, and it's important to get a sense. Am I sensing the difference between when they're open and when they're closed? If I can't read them, then they'll do better with somebody who can read them accurately. We've mentioned this before. Am I seeing my client as creative, resourceful, and whole versus broken? The moment we sort of shift into seeing the difficulty more than the possibility, we're standing in that expert role and are losing our neuro-humility. Am I trying to see the world through their eyes? That's that piece of stretching ourselves into seeing things, to challenge ourselves about our assumptions about how the world works. And this piece about, do I know enough about different neurotypes and the lived experience of being neurodivergent to validate their experience, is really important. all through this presentation, we have not talked about, like, here are the characteristics of this particular neurotype. And we do that because we think that the coaching principles are more important than the neurotype. But when we're one-on-one with a client, it's really helpful to have heard a lot of stories of people who are similar, who's processed the world similarly to our client, so that we have a sense of patterns, so that we have a sense of saying, yeah, like there's a whole bunch of people in the world that this is how their experience is. And we stand on a base of confidence because we have that experience. And that really helps produce trust and safety in the relationship. Tracy, anything you want to add on here before we move on?
No, I don't think so. I think we're going to do it in the next one.
Okay, awesome. So as coaches, we're always growing. And one of the things that happens is that clients show up and we get engaged in a coaching relationship, and then they bring a part of themselves that we hadn't seen before, and we go, oh, here's my growing edge. I'm not actually doing this as well as I wanted to. And we notice that, you know, I'm struggling with holding coaching presence and that sort of thing. And so we're not saying, as soon as you notice that you had a bad session with a client, you should refer them to somebody else. We're saying, notice the patterns. And if you notice a place where your client is bringing you stuff that is pushing your edges, take responsibility for growing yourself, having a self-reflective practice, having a mentor or a supervisor or both, attending training on what you need to learn. Somebody comes in and they use a word to describe a neurotype that you've never heard of. You know, Google it a little bit and get a sense of what they're talking about. Maybe find out if any of your colleagues know anything about it, so that they can give you some tips about the things at the like threat assessment, synesthesia, hyposensitivity kind of level of functionality that you might want to be looking for in a coaching session. And the big one is learning about others' lived experiences. The most powerful way of being able to empathize and reflect back to a wide variety of clients is just to hear a wide variety of stories of people's lived experiences. Oh, so Tracy.
Yeah. So if you reflect on those questions and you find I'm not there yet, right? And it's a yet. It's a yet. But if you find you're not there yet, you need to refer responsibly. Some other things to think about, and this list I'm going to read is in your handout, but do your reflections don't consistently match the client's understanding. So we always check for understanding, and usually hopefully we get close. If over and over, if that's not happening and they're correcting over and over, you might not have enough of their worldview to be able to effectively coach. Same thing when you can't follow the client's train of thought. Actually, one of the things my clients say to me a lot when they first come in is, I'm sorry, I'm all over the place. Or I think I was just wandering. I think I went on a tangent. Because people are used to telling them that they can't follow them. And because my brain is more like that, I'm like, I'm good. We're good. You're just right the way you are. And there goes the validation part. If you can't hold their agenda, this is true for everybody, right? You feel like you just don't get them, that ineffable quality of fit and really just having that understanding that is not really quantifiable. If you notice that you're seeing them as broken and that there's fixes, if you can't keep in mind that difference rather than broken, that's a pretty big one. You get sucked into their point of view. So a lot of the clients that we work with are very good at rationalization, are very good at explaining why their belief is absolutely true. And it's more, for me, it has been more easy to get inducted into those than some of my other clients in the past. When you notice that, maybe after the fact, wait, that's not what was going on in reflection. You see that's happening over and over. That might be a sign to refer to someone who can maintain their own boundary there. And just plain, I mean, we flat out said this before, but if you can't stay regulated with them, then you're not going to be able to coach effectively. So those are some of the ways that you can sort of self-assess and see like, okay, what's actually happening? Okay, wait a second. Let me check this out. But like I said, you can go forward, Kate. It's a yet, right? This is really about coaching range. We already know it's not normal to be able to coach everybody, right? That client is yours, this client is mine. Like the clients find the coaches they need. So we already know that. And honestly, like a lot of times the clients are not going to come back and engage you as their coach if they don't feel that fit, right? I have plenty of clients who don't have as many brain quirks and, you know, going all over the place and all that kind of stuff. And they don't come back to me because it's not a fit with the way that I am. The closer your neurotype is to your clients, oftentimes the easier it is for you to coach them because that communication becomes easier because you have that sort of similar worldview that's sort of enough to get you part of the way there before you even ask a question. And you can improve your coaching range. You can increase it, right? We do this all the time. Closer to neurotype meaning, Jim, like I am an ADHDer and autistic. And so I have an easier time coaching ADHDers and autistic folks than I do more neurotypical folks. So I'm closer to that neurotype. So you can work on this. You can increase with deliberate practice, reflection, all of that kind of thing. Yeah, yes, exactly, Letty. Deliberate practice, reflection, and the coaching supervision. We know it's a relatively new concept in North America, and also it's super helpful. I mean, I take stuff to my coach supervisor all the time when I find myself falling into the very traps that we're talking about. So you can increase it, and you might not be there quite yet, right? So continually looking on this and doing that self-assessment and doing that reflection, and that's part of the coaching mindset too, right? So there's another competence. Okay.
All right, Tracy, I'm going to say we skip the next one and we go straight to takeaways so that we can
Absolutely, because
yeah. Yeah. So this is going to sound familiar. Coach the person, not the neurotype. You can't coach when you or your client is dysregulated, and referring serves your client when they're out of your range. If you remember those three things and dig down into the nuances of the coaching competencies, you're on your way to being more neurodiversity inclusive. Anything you want to sort of touch on there, Tracy?
Well, in that last one, and serving our clients, that's what we're here for, right? So serving our clients sometimes means finding somebody who fits them better. We know that. So this is just another piece of that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and apologies to Marsha Clark because we kind of stole the first one from her, except we substituted neurotype. That's not right, Marsha Clark? Marsha
Reynolds.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. Marsha Reynolds. Delete that from the recording, please.
Speaking of the recording, you're going to get the content information for us in some other places, but it's there and we're just sort of flashing it up. But now we've got a few minutes to sort of talk about questions. So Tracy, I have not been following the chat. Are there questions that we want to sort of pull from that?
Yes, I've got a parking lot. And so let me answer one general question, because we've gotten a couple times that where else do I learn, or what other resource do we have? Well, Neurodiversity Coaching Academy, if you want to take a deeper dive into different subjects, we've spent the last 12 months doing master classes every year, and we have recordings of all of that. So I'm going to put our website in the chat, and you can find everything there, including subscribing to our email, so you know kind of where we're going, what we're doing, and where you might want to participate next. So that's one to start with. I'm also going to put in the LinkedIn for the Academy and for both Kate and me. So we'd love to connect. We'd love to continue this conversation. So that's one thing. There are other resources, and somebody referenced Chad. Somebody referenced there's also Attitude Mag, Attitude Mag for ADHDers. For autism, there's a few good authors I'd recommend. Devin Price is one. I'm looking at my bookshelf. Devin Price is definitely one. Also, the hashtag actually autistic is often, it's not all great, but that's the hashtag people have started using to explain their own autistic experience. And one of the ways, because we can't generalize, is just listening to as many lived experiences as you can will help you get a sense of things. There isn't one for ADHD. There are a couple of books there's one called Neurodiversity Coaching. It's mostly about coaching at work. There's honestly not a lot yet. So there's that. Okay.
All right, you have a parking lot. Let's get.
I do. I don't remember who asked this, but how do you differentiate between neurodivergence and personality when clients present these statements, emotions? Hopefully we answered that with that aside about this is everybody. It's about being neurodiversity inclusive, right? So you don't have to know. We don't have to differentiate. We just look at the individual in front of us and work with what's going on there, right?
Yeah,
Kate?
I mean, I would say the way that neuroscience works in the relationship between neuroscience and psychology actually is that differences in personality are reflected in different physiology in the nervous system. And so actually we're talking about the same thing.
I wonder if we answered some of these kind of along the way. On the note of interpersonal relationships, what is suggested regarding healthy boundary setting for NT and ND people when interacting with each other? I think that was Kate. Could you say a little more about that question? Do you mind?
No, I was anticipating you might ask that. Thank you. And Kate, we exchanged a little bit over LinkedIn. So just to give a little bit more clarity, Tracy, it's nice to meet you. I am fascinated by this. And Kate, I didn't know that an HSP is neurodivergent. That's something I just learned. And I first heard the term more than 10 years ago for one of my coaching clients. And now in the last 2-3 weeks, I've learned that I am that. My best friend is neurodivergent and has a bundle. So I'm learning a lot from both of you. What I'm learning in my own journey of being an HSP and navigating that, also having done a lot of therapy, is, of course, boundaries is essential and important for our health and well-being. I know that as a coach, I know that personally, but as I'm researching and holding the hand alongside process with my best friend, as we've navigated this in the last few years with accommodations and her interest in psychology, we love it. And some of the way the dysregulation shows up for her, I want to be absolutely respectful, and I would want to do the same for any client of if there's, and I may not have the proper terminology, but let's just say there's an emotional dysregulation showing up in a way that could be really challenging for the interpersonal relationship. I know that it can be challenging depending on the person and where they are and what their ND is, with what is possible, either tonal cues, recognition, somatics, all of those things. So I know that it can be such a challenge and frustration for we neurodivergent people to be expected to be neurotypical when we're not neurotypical. So bearing in mind respectfully, is it possible to ask a neurodivergent person in any kind of interpersonal relationship for if there's something that starts to change in tone or rage or expression or dysregulation that becomes challenging interpersonally, like just any kind of outbursts that are not positive or healthy? Is that acceptable to ask a neurodivergent person to work with them to try to identify those early onset markers? I mean, I am one and I'm learning this myself, but HSP is very different in this specific example. And there's a bundle there. So I just want to come in very respectfully as a coach, as a best friend, as someone who is it myself. You guys are the experts. Help me out. Is that more clear?
Yeah, it's a really, really great question. And it's a really, really challenging place in communication. And I would say as a friend and as a coach, your responsibilities and your boundaries should be different.
Yeah.
and
they are.
Right. And I think the thing to remember is that it's going to be a custom conversation for each relationship. And the piece that we can and should be taking responsibility for is doing our own regulation before we get into a question of conversation about what is the interpersonal relationship piece, and coming into it from curiosity about what is it that you need to be able to show up in the relationship in a way that I can stay in relationship, because that's what the boundary conversation is. The boundary conversation is always, what are the ground rules that we need to play by in order to stay in relationship? And if you come from a place of curiosity to ask that question, and you get curious about what are their capacity and their access needs and their pieces, to try and get into alignment about like shared ground rules, that's the conversation that needs to happen.
Perfect.
Sometimes that is workable and sometimes that's not. And
Thank you. Spot on. Tracy, do you need me to explain the other two at all? I know some of them we kind of covered.
No, I'm sorry, I missed what Kate said because
Thank you to both of you.
This, by the way, this happens all the time in families. The hereditary aspect, like neurodivergences run in families, and different folks are going to have different sensitivities. So that's a fun time.
I have that too. Hey.
Right?
Check all of these.
Research that high IQ seems to be associated with high functioning. Is that accurate? So this is a language thing. We're transitioning from high functioning. The next best thing is low needs. And really we're trying to look at it as not a line, but like a circle, that each person has their own individual spiky profile. So that's one. I don't know this research. Kate, do you know this research?
No, there seems to be, there's a couple of things associated with high IQ. Firstly, that sort of the kinds of learning disabilities that show up in schools, they're about 4% in the general population and 14% in the gifted population. So there's actually like this big overlap. Masking and disappearing into the IQ space is it's really interesting, because high IQ facilitates developing coping mechanisms. Things. So it gets sort of complicated in the high IQ twice exceptional space.
That's what she and I keep talking about. We keep coming up to that because, quite frankly, her area of study psychology, mine is too, human behavior, and also we're both trauma survivors. So we're fascinated by the CPSD and where our sensory stuff is. And then we're also like beautifully connected in this curiosity. And it's just really, guys, it's a lot.
Yeah. I highly recommend a deep dive into twice exceptionality. You will find that fascinating and informative. Yep.
Thank you.
We did one of our master classes on that.
Okay. That's one of the recordings I think that Kate sent me, the videos for $10. Okay. Yep. Thanks.
Maria, I was going to pull up your question next.
Oh, go ahead then.
The same question?
Please. Yeah, that's been under discussion in our Dave commission of our local chapter in Costa Rica. Some people are very opposed that lived experience is important and some are not. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit more thoughts about that.
So Kate, the question was, how does ICF take the importance of lived experience into coaching?
Have you found controversy about that?
So I would say that the controversy, to the extent that I've run into it, is that there's some really interesting data that suggests that it's harder to have empathy for people who are struggling with a problem that you have already overcome. It is harder to self-manage out of giving advice if you have shared lived experience. And so that's from the coaching place. And from the client, from the client perspective, lived experience and been there, done that experience is often an enormously valuable part of feeling like they can trust the coach. And so actually the place of lived experience is really it's really complicated and messy, because what creates trust for the client and then what also creates skill set for the coach aren't always actually the same. And so it's a really interesting management piece. I just saw Sarah's question about how old should a neurodiverse individual be to benefit from coaching. And I would say it entirely depends on the individual. I have been coaching my children since they were about 8.
And it also depends on the coach you find. So I know an ADHD coach who coaches kids as young as 5. She was a therapist before. She's trained in play therapy. She incorporates that into her coaching, but it is clearly coaching that she is doing. So yeah, depends on the individual and depends on the coach. I try not to coach anybody under about 15, and they've got to really be self-aware and bright and like ready to go from 15 to say 19 for me to take them as a client, because it's a whole different species down there.
I'm kind of checking in on time, because we are a few minutes over our time. I'm happy if there's a final question, but also recognize that we have other avenues of connection through LinkedIn with both of our speakers, through I mean, they post incredible content on LinkedIn, and then also through their academy. So Tracy and Kate, I'll let you kind of finish up. If you want to handle another question, it's up to you. But yeah, we're just a bit over time, and I've been incredibly delighted by the attention and the attendance and participation here. It's remarkable. I'm getting so much out of it myself, and know others are as well.
Yeah, thank you. Like I said at the beginning, like we appreciate everybody just who is interested in this and coming and learning and asking excellent questions. It's really exciting for us. So thank you for that gift.
And so to the extent that we didn't answer questions, please reach out and ask us in one of these other formats, because yeah, we really do want to make sure that people are getting their questions answered in this space.
And please do fill out the feedback form that Angie mentioned, because we will get the results of that too, and we would love it to improve our presentations and see what was valuable, what wasn't, and all that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Angie, for having us.
Thank you all. Thank you, Kate and Tracy.